carry her and
All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to week one of the Queer Youth Network Leadership Program. My name is Alice, and I am the founder and chairperson of Voices of Influence Australia, and I use she, her pronouns. Thank you all so much for being so punctual and to do the first session. I thought we were going to have to wait around for a little while to make sure everyone was settled and ready to commence, but I can see that we're all eager beavers, so thank you so much for that. Um, Awesome. Okay, well, I will start sharing my screen just so we can get on with it. Here we go. All right. Let me know if you guys can see this. Awesome. Okay. All right. So as stated before, so we today, the first session today is talking about leading with a love ethic, which for me is something that I hold very close and dear to my heart. It is something that I have always kind of added to my toolkit of me as a leader, as a person, as a daughter, as a sister, as a partner, as a friend. Having a love ethic is something that I've tried to embody as much as I can, and by no means have I mastered it whatsoever. It's been a constant learning journey. And I want to reiterate and assure you that even after today, even though we kind of start to unpack some of the concepts of a love ethic, none of us will be masters at this anytime soon. And I think that's something so beautiful about leadership as well. It's dynamic and constantly evolving and growing. You'll see before we get cracking, actually, you'll see below that there are a couple of functions there. The first is like the Q&A function. And so that is goes directly to me. Feel free to ask any questions you may have. There is nothing, no, it sounds a bit cliche to say, but there are no stupid questions, particularly when it comes to leadership and lessons that we've learned or perhaps curiosities that we have. I also will say that when I get excited, I speak really fast. So if there's at any point anyone's finding it difficult to understand me, please just raise your hand, which should be another function. Or in that Q&A, just say, yo, Alice, slow down. And I will be a lot more mindful about it. All right. So before to get things cracking, so I'd like to start off with an acknowledgement of country. And so I like to say that a Voices of Influence Australia acknowledges the traditional custodians of the lands of which we live and work and play, and also pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. We express our gratitude that we can share what is and always will be Aboriginal land. And we aspire that in the spirit of reconciliation, that we can move forward together to a place of justice, healing, and partnership. I personally am joining you from Aranda country here in the Northern Territory, or of those of you who aren't so familiar of where Aranda country is, I am in Alice Springs. Oh gosh, sorry, there we go. I'll put it on mute so you don't hear that. And I am thankful to have the privilege to work for an Aboriginal controlled organisation at the moment. And again, that I learn, live, and play and listen to the lands of which I'm on today. The land that will always will be and always was Aboriginal land. All right, so let's begin to talk about QYN. Voices of Influence Australia are so excited that this is up and running. I cannot tell you the amount of work that has gone into it. This has been a project that has probably been 2 years in the making, in terms of how the concept evolved as a concept, as an idea, and now as our inaugural leadership program. So we lovingly call it QYN. So that stands for the Queer Youth Network. And although this is a program specifically for young emerging queer leaders, for us, queer also means, well, queer, united, engaged, empowered, and respected. We're really fortunate that we're able to partner with the government of New South Wales, who have very generously been able to give us the support to get this up and rolling. And we're hopeful that this will be a continued project that we have beyond this first cohort of 2024. But we are beyond grateful that you guys have taken a chance on yourself to participate in this program, and more importantly, that you've taken a chance on Voices of Influence Australia, to be there to walk side by side with you as you continue to evolve your own leadership style and your own leadership direction and journey. Beautiful. Oh, I've already got a question there. Also, it's just hello, beautiful. Thank you so much, guys. Fantastic. All right. So, I know a lot of you are familiar with what you've signed up for. Well, hopefully you're familiar with what you have signed up for. But the queer, like the well, QYN is or the Queer Youth Network consists of both online and in-person workshops to engage queer young voices, and also strengthen individual and collective youth leadership. And that's really with the purpose of maintaining community well-being, inclusion, and also to improve community solidarity as well. But really, in essence, the entire purpose of QYN is to provide safe spaces for diverse young people. And that's mainly to effectively to make sure that we are equipping not only the leaders of tomorrow, but the leaders of today in the queer space with effective and creative communication styles that you can then use with yourselves, which I know is a strange concept about how we communicate with ourselves. But I remember a long time ago, I was told or taught the lesson that the most difficult relationship that we have in our lives is the one with ourselves. And so it makes sense that how we communicate with ourselves is also a bit of a difficult journey as well. But we'll also make sure that we're equipping you guys with the skills to be able to have creatively communicate with your families and communities that you're a part of as well. Uh, Really, the purpose of QYN is also to strengthen those local community networks to also effectively overcome those barriers to participation. And I'll get into that a little bit in a little bit, just to talk about how VOI emerged and the purpose of VOI. And then finally, QYN exists really to activate local leadership and to engage in fruitful and challenging conversations. But that's QYN, which is super exciting. Um, so you guys would have seen this probably, but like just to give you a bit of an outline of what to expect, particularly over the next 6 weeks, is how this is what the program will look like. So we're starting off with week one, which we're going to be looking a bit of an introduction, but also to look at what leading with a love ethic is. Next week, we will also look at like engaging in what we call a leadership compass. And all of you would have been now had access to our QYN Leadership Hub, which is the online learning space we have. And so hopefully some of you have already started to dabble in a couple of these topics. So next week will be the leadership compass. The following week to that, we'll be looking at how do we build supportive and resilient communities. And then week four, we'll be looking at intersectional storytelling and social change, which is something that is such a juicy topic and something that is constantly dynamic and evolving. So that will be a really great one as well. And then we'll also be the week five will be about real talk and decoding queer narratives in the media, which again is something that is very much connected to how we look at intersectional storytelling and how that influences and mobilizes social change. And finally, in week six, we'll talk about how do we do strong and healthy community building in the digital world and digital space. And so the first 6 weeks of this program are going to be online. You will see me online for those 6 weeks, but I won't be facilitating all of them. I'll be facilitating this week and next. And then we will also be looking at, I'll also be around as a bit of support to make sure that. So sorry, guys, 1 second. I'm so sorry for all of that. I can see you all coming online now, which is I'm so sorry, but of course there's going to be technical difficulties. Let me just get this up rolling again. Okay. Alrighty. Let's go share screen. Okay. All right. Let me just confirm that we can see what's in front of us now. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Just confirming that people can see this. Awesome. All right. Thank you, guys. Cool, cool, cool. Just seeing some of your chat messages. Awesome. Okay, great. Yeah, so that's basically what's happening there. And I know that I've been able to speak a lot of you individually about about the program itself, and those particularly that are a part of the QYN Leadership Program and Ambassador Program, which is super exciting. Great to see some of you still joining on. So sorry for canceling that accidentally. Forgive me for the technical issues, but it is something that you're going to have to bear with me for. Alrighty, so the thing that I also want to share is before we jump into this, obviously the next 6 weeks are going to be a little bit intense for some people. I guess in terms of the information that we're consuming, as well as also the information that we're able to kind of digest in our own time and in our own reflections as well. But before we jump into things, I want to kind of share with you just about like the learning zones. So for those of you that aren't familiar with the learning zones, so there's kind of 3 tiers to that. So, and for those of you that are asking questions, there isn't a screen to share right now. So this is, you'll just get to look at my face and to listen to a lot of this. So there's 3 kind of like tiers in the learning zone. The first is the comfort zone. Then there is the learning zone, which is the kind of proximity that we want to be in. And then there's the panic zone, which is what we're going to try to want to avoid. But at the same time, I think when we're learning new concepts, I think part of that learning process is also dismantling ideas that we already have, right? And that can be a challenging process in itself. So before we get into what those learning zones are, I want to share a little bit of housekeeping with you guys. And I would have just said before I accidentally canceled the session, that I will be in attendance of all these sessions, and I won't be facilitating all of them, but my role will be it as your well-being advisor. So what does that mean? I am a social worker by trade and a counselor before I stepped into the world that I am now. And I take a lot of pride in wearing that badge and that label. I think social workers are some of those frontline defenders of human rights, and they do a phenomenal job of it. And so what that will mean, you'll see in the Q&A function that if any of you need any support or advice or just want to have a yarn, you'll be able to send me a message anonymously, and then I will be able to kind of bring you in or like direct you into a private, like what's called like a breakout room, which will just be the 2 of us. And I'll be able to sit in that space with you, even just hold that space for you as you try to navigate whatever feelings might be coming up. And hopefully be able to help give you the tools that you need to continue on that learning journey as well. So back to the learning zones though. So as I said, that there is both there is the comfort zone, the learning zone, and the panic zone. So basically the comfort zone, and this is the best way I know how to describe it, is at the center of the learning zone, which lies on which really we have the most comfort, support. We feel the most safe, secure. We feel the most seen as well. It's also our most familiar environment where we feel most confident in our skills, in our knowledge, and in our abilities. But in the zone, we don't take risks because we know we already have that ability to achieve whatever outcome that we desire. So for this reason, actually, if we always choose tasks that lie within our comfort zone, we don't push ourselves to learn new things, or we don't seek new knowledge to grow. So even though the comfort zone is always, think of that as like your couch at home. It's the place that you can always come back to, and you know that you'll still be a lot of learning and you engage in a lot of the material, but it's not going to kind of push you to develop your own leadership style or framework as well. But I guess right on the cusp of that comfort zone is the learning zone. And so really that learning zone is just out of the comfort lines. And this is where it's really where we kind of like, we are challenged to try new things and grow new skills. At times, this learning zone can be uncomfortable though, because it isn't our safe space. If we think about that analogy again of our comfort zone, that couch at home, or maybe it's in our bed, like we know that is safe. But also because it isn't our safe place, it means that we risk making mistakes and failure. And I say failure is a good thing. I think if those of us who are on my team, they would say that all of us kind of lean into the idea of failure and think it's actually an amazing opportunity for growth and learning. And I think it's important to reiterate that we didn't fear too much about failure, because failure is a necessary step to learning. When we spend ample time in our learning zone, often after time, our comfort zone expands. And because we have mastered new skills and therefore created new habits, it means that we are able to kind of lean into that vulnerability more and continue to kind of expand our limits. Where things get a little bit tricky, and I think this is maybe where some of you might want to lean into what I was just talking to before about like using that safe space and mental health space online, is when we push ourselves beyond the point of those healthy challenges. And we can enter a point of stress or overwhelm or distress. And what we call this is the panic zone. And I think a lot of people find it hard to differentiate between stress and distress. I think a lot of people, for a lot of people, stress kind of falls into that learning zone because it's new and it's uncomfortable. But distress is something that we want to avoid, and that's what the panic zone is in. And this zone does not enable. Ultimately, really, when we're talking about this learning zone, the zone does not enable us to be able to learn new things because our brain and body kind of go, oh my God, high alert, what the hell is going on? I'm not safe. As they begin to kind of experience that stress. And the panic zone is different, really, for every individual. However, what we know is a common factor is a fear of failure or uncertainty, and also a lack of desire or interest in the subject matter. So when we push beyond into that panic zone, our brain completely disconnects and it says, oh, I cannot consume any more information. None of this is going in. And that it's not somewhere that we want to ever want to get to. Um, and I think when we find ourselves in the panic zone, we should pause, reflect on what we need to get back to our learning or our comfort zones, and then try again to kind of expand that boundary, which is in the learning zone itself. So and that's not an easy job to do. Again, I am not a master of this. No one is a master of this. But we are constantly trying to expand those limits in a safe way and a way that is going to be helpful to us and investing in ourselves and our growth. Which is challenging, don't get me wrong, but also super exciting and something that I think we continue to learn from all the time. All right, so um, I'm going to share my screen now again, and hopefully this works again this time. I'm so sorry, guys. If this isn't the way, here we go. Present full screen, present. Okay, let me try this one more time. Okay, share. Can we see this? Yes. And it's paused. Okay. You can't see this. Oh my goodness, guys. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry about all of this. Let me try one more time. Okay. Share. Okay, we're good. Awesome. Fantastic. Okay, so before much ado, guys, I'm going to get into actually the session that we're on today, which is talking about leading with a love ethic. And hopefully some of you have been able to digest the material or at least have a look at some of the material. But if not, that is perfectly okay and something that we don't need to panic about. So really, ultimately, what we're going to be discussing today, or what I'm going to be sharing with you, my thoughts and what we've learned along the way, is what is love? And that's a really interesting topic. I think lots of us have experienced love in its forms and all its diversity and dynamics. But I think it's really interesting to see how this applies to leadership. Excuse me. I think also as love is something that we've kind of been conditioned to lean away from in leadership. But I think what we're now learning, particularly in the social transformation space and the youth leadership space, is that love has a huge part and is a huge tool that we can lean into. We're going to be talking about love for community and self. And we're going to be exploring, looking at love as a transformative force when we're looking at social change. And we're also going to be talking about critical consciousness. And so, what does that mean as for us as leaders as well? Alrighty, so are we still with me? I know it's all sounding a little abstract at the moment, but hopefully we'll be able to kind of unpack this in a way which is really exciting and launches you into your own leadership journeys as well. So, as I said before, we're going to be talking about understanding love, exploring the intersectionality of love and social justice and what that could apply and what that means. We're going to look at a little bit of theory, looking at feminist theory and patriarchy and what that means in leadership and having a love ethic in leadership. And then we're going to looking at promoting self-love as well. Here you go. Sorry, guys, just seeing questions here. Awesome. Love it. Okay. And then what was it? Yeah, and then we're gonna look at like promoting self-love, social transformation, and critical consciousness as well. So to start with, I want us to look at this is a quote that I always come back to. I actually, if I could show you, I have it hanging up on my wall in front of me here. But it says that love is what will bring us together. It's what will make us fight for each other. It's also what will make us stay. And this is something that I've always resonated really deeply with, and constantly have it in the back of my mind, whether it's making leadership decisions, whether it's navigating complex scenarios as a friend, a leader, a sister, a lover, a daughter, whatever it might be. But this is something that I hold quite dear to my heart. So what are we talking about here? So basically everything we're going to be unpacking and discussing today is talking about bell hooks. And bell hooks is a phenomenal person. Unfortunately, she passed away in 2021. But bell hooks was a phenomenal author, prominent author, like feminist theorist, cultural critic, as well as social activist. And she was honored for her groundbreaking work in feminist theory and intersectionality and cultural criticism. Um, which is, and I think still today, I don't think there's anyone that really quite has been able to live up to what she speaks about. But really, All About Love, which is a book that she wrote in the 90s, and All About Love is an exploration of love's transformative power and its potential for social change. Um, and then what we really are going to kind of hone in on today is this concept of living by a love ethic. So a love ethic, as book Bell Hooks says, is what it is that it empowers us to transcend fear, which often serves as a tool to uphold systems of control and dominance. So when we're looking at that kind of more structural justice look, when we're looking at these systems of power and domination, uh, according to Bell Hooks and the concept of love ethic, this is a really essential tool that we have to be able to dismantle these issues and rebuild these structures and these worlds in a place that is built of love, equality, equity, and a way that has that transformative social change. So, what is love? Love is love is the really what we understand is that love is the will to extend oneself for the purpose of nurturing one's own and other spiritual growth. We totally understand that the word spiritual in itself is not something that all of us connect with, especially in the queer space and its connotations with religion. As myself as a queer woman, I've wrestled with my own relationship with religion and spirituality. Um, and Bell Hooks has been a tool that has really helped me navigate through that as well. Um, and I think particularly because in the context of when we're talking about a love ethic, Hooke identifies that spirituality does not inherently imply any kind of religious affiliation, which I know is often the go-to that we all think of. But instead it refers to an internal sense of, or it's an internal sense of self that goes beyond the body, beyond the mind, beyond the spirit itself. It's talking about something that is bigger than ourselves. I often talk about it as like the universe. I think a lot of people kind of like seem to make fun of me for that a little bit. But it's really talking about an entity that is external to ourselves, but also that is able to help us harmonize the mind, body, and spirit in ourselves. And I think for me, the way that like how I interpret it in terms of community leadership and transformational change is that love is an active choice, and therefore it's not an innate quality of leadership, or it's not an equate quality of leadership or friendship or relationships. It's not a feeling, but rather it's a choice, and it's a commitment to nurture oneself, and it's a commitment to nurture others as well. And I think adding on to that is that Hooke really argues that patriarchy has sort of belittled this concept, and belittled this kind of investment in another person. And it almost, I think when we're taking a bit of a feminist lens to it, it relegates it to the responsibility of the woman, or responsibility to the typical primary caretaker. Um, and rather, I think like what Hooks at least kind of pushes for is that instead of mutual care, patriarchy upholds the value of power and control. Um, and Hooke also explains that love won't grow in relationships when the primary focus is power, because the search of power is inherently selfish. Loving someone actually requires us to move past that pervasive selfishness of our culture, and become fully invested in another person. And however, to do that, actually, however, it's important to acknowledge that when we relinquish that power, we also relinquish a feeling of control, right? And it leaves us feeling vulnerable and in search of something that we can trust. And for me, an overwhelming and resounding argument that comes through this when we're talking about a love ethic and when we're talking about love and leadership is that love is predicted on trust. In fact, trust is the only currency of love. Without it, it kind of falls back and falls back onto that concept of power and control, which is something that we don't want to. I guess it's something that's a distorted view of love in itself when we're talking about love and leadership. Love love is often distorted to emphasize the importance of power and control over reciprocity and trust. So, I know it's all sounding a little abstract right now, but I'm hoping that you're still following and that we can try with slowly being able to piece these pieces together. So you're probably all thinking, like, Alice, what the hell is what is love, and what is the love ethic, and what do you want about? And this is a very abstract concept to lean into things with. And you're right. I think like whenever it's talking to the team at Voices of Influence Australia, or whether it's talking to people in my world, all of us have a very individually abstract concept of what this love means in leadership. Um, but when we're talking, like I guess like the question that we're constantly wrestling with is like, what is this love ethic? And also, is everyone entitled to have or to live meaningful lives? But it's I guess is love ethic is a love ethic a human right? And in All About Love, Hooks basically she describes a love ethic as the belief that all people have an innate right to live self-determined and meaningful lives. Additionally, she kind of claims that our own well-being is wrapped up in that collective well-being as well. But when we're talking about like I know a few of you that I've spoken to you have human rights backgrounds, and your brains are probably going ding ding ding. Like I'm hearing all this language and know exactly where it's coming from. But when we're talking about self-determination, this is probably one of the ultimate human rights that we have that underpin a lot of the same securities and civil liberties that we have. But I think what I've learned, at least in my own leadership journey, is that the beauty of adopting a love ethic is that it empowers us to transcend fear, and which often serves as a tool to uphold these systems of control and dominance. Cultures of dominance use fear to keep individuals isolated and on guard. We see all these systems, tools of domination. An example I can think of is law. For those of you, I know that I've said that my background's in social work, but I'm currently working for an Aboriginal legal service now. And something that I'm constantly reckoning with is how law, or the legal system, or what we understand as the rule of law, is a constant tool of domination, and it is constantly and it's designed to completely annihilate certain communities. In Australia, it's designed to completely annihilate cold communities, and particularly Aboriginal communities, who are the most highly incarcerated population in the world. But when we're talking about love, where love, as Hook says it, allows us to have the tools to transcend that fear and dismantle these tools of dominance. And I think when we're also about like love, it combats isolation by fostering connections as well and facilitating that greater understanding, both of which act as power, both well, greater understanding and connection, which act actually as a powerful antidote to that fear as well when these systems of domination are around. And I think another argument there is that it transforms a society that we need love to become foundational cultural value, to become a foundational cultural value. That informs all aspects of life, whether that's individual actions or institutional policy or media production as well. And that's something we'll continue to explore over these next 6 weeks. I think as a side note, and this is something my brain constantly does, but when like kind of trying to extrapolate and build from these ideas, is the origins of so there's a book which is done by Hannah Arendt, which is called The Origins of Totalitarianism. Which is a very thick book, and I'm not expecting any of you to read it. But basically, she goes on to explain that isolation is necessary for fear to take root. And when people lack those meaningful connections and sense of community, they become more susceptible to fear and manipulation and are less likely to collectively respond to that control. So for me, I guess like when we're looking at these two kind of concepts or these two schools of thought, to me, it makes perfect sense that a lot of the reasons that we face so much backlash and so much pain is because this concept of a love ethic has been completely amiss and completely missing. And I think ultimately what we learn from Hooks and what we learn about the role of love within these situations is, well, I guess like from what we learn from Hooks is that she offers a roadmap really to help people root their lives and decision making from a place of love rather than a place of control and domination and fear. And I guess the first step of that actually is that you first need to learn how to love yourself. And I think this is something that we're constantly, I don't know, this concept of self-love is thrown around a lot, right? And I think it's quite abstract and it's hard to comprehend and it's hard to kind of be able to apply to everyday situations. But at least what I understand from a love ethic is probably one of the most important foundational tools to be able to launch on from that. All right, so moving on to self-love. So what does practicing self-love actually mean? So again, living by a love ethic begins, as I just said, from practicing self-love. And the way that we can explain this is that many of us find it challenging to cultivate that self-love because of the negative messages that we've been receiving about ourselves as children, from our loved ones, or from the broader community. And I think those of us in the queer community in particular have been very much targeted by these negative narratives and these ideas of that internalized hatred and that internalized homophobia, or those internalized concepts of what it is to be queer, how it is to identify, and how it is to completely be able to express yourselves in however what way you desire. And these messages that we need, all these messages that we've been fed, whether it's from those structural or social or theoretical concepts that we're constantly trying to unlearn and dismantle, these are messages that we need to unlearn in order to fully accept and fully love ourselves as well. And I guess what we're kind of talking about here is this concept of self-love requires the cultivation of self-esteem. For me, as again, my background is social work as well, so I'm constantly trying to link these to different ideas. And I remember there's a really interesting psychotherapist called Brandon, and he basically talks about, which Hook kind of like taps into this as well, but he talks about the 5 practices of healthy self-esteem, and that is self-awareness, self-acceptance, self-responsibility, self-assertion, and then purposeful living. And apparently these are the 5 domains that we work with, which allow us to have healthy self-esteem, which is the almost a non-negotiable foundational element for how do we practice this love ethic and how do we practice this self-love. And honestly, like what Brandon also kind of suggests that self-awareness is the foundation for self-esteem as well. So when you react thoughtfully to your reality, you make better decisions. And when you make better decisions, that kind of then in turn kind of has the benefit and the consequential benefit that allows you to feed into that self-esteem as well. So what does this all mean? So I'm going to go through those 5 different domains. So self-awareness, self-acceptance, self-responsibility, and then we're going to go into self-assertion and purposeful living as well. So let's start in the first one. So self-awareness. So self-awareness is a practice that allows you to embrace practices that promote like personal growth, connection, and well-being, whilst also looking critically at the world around you. So it's allowing us to be able to reconcile in our own heads how our own individual system connects and interacts with that family system, community system, and that broader systemic structural system as well. And for Hooks, what she talks about when talking about a love ethic is that self-awareness requires you to question your beliefs, biases, and actions, and strive for alignment between your values and your daily life. And this is when we kind of start to tap into that idea of critical consciousness, where it's allowing us to kind of lean into those vulnerabilities, surrender that power to be able to recognize like what elements, what responsibility in yourself do we take for the world around us, and how do we navigate that? And again, just as I said before, Brandon, the psychotherapist, suggests that when we make better decisions with ourselves through this lens of critical consciousness, it directly feeds into our self-esteem as well. So the second domain of that is self-acceptance. And self-acceptance is the practice of embracing and acknowledging yourself fully without judgment or criticism. And this is something I feel like no one ever masters in life, to be honest. I'm 27 now. I feel like I've maybe mastered 10%, maybe that's probably being very generous. Probably, let's say 5% of what it looks like to embrace and accept yourself without judgment and criticism. And it's also part of that journey is letting go of societal expectations and external definitions of worth, and affirming your inherent value and worthiness, regardless of these structures and these narratives that are fed into us. Example I can think of this actually is what's an example I can think of at the top of my head? Makeup. This is probably not the best example, but I think what this kind of taps into is that I think for those of us who enjoy and love playing, dress up and makeup, I think there's an argument there that says that we have kind of fallen at some degree prey to, or like the beauty industry has completely weaponized our insecurities against us. And again, that's part of that capitalist regime that they're trying to make money off our insecurities, which all of us, including myself, kind of fall into sometimes. And so when we talk about self-acceptance, it goes back into that concept of being able to reconcile those 3 worlds in our head about the relationship we have with ourselves, ourselves, within the community, within those structures, and how do we accept that about ourselves without judgment and criticism. And I guess in my own personal journey, I guess like three things that I've tried to learn every day or try to put in place every day is that you need to be on your own team and you need to be on your own side. Um, and I think you also need to have a willingness and an appetite to want to experience all of your emotions and all of your behaviors, and that in whatever ugliness or beauty that that presents as well. And ultimately, and this sometimes does sound like a cliche, but you do need to treat yourself with kindness as well. I think we've all heard the concept of when we've had those negative narratives that we fed to ourselves, or we've perhaps spoken to a really dear friend of ours and they've said, well, would you ever say that about me? Or whatever it might be. And often the answer is, well, of course you're not, because you're not me. And I think that the concept of like that self-acceptance is about dismantling those narratives that we have and rebuilding it. The third kind of pillar that we talk about here when we're talking about self-love is self-responsibility. So, self-responsibility is the practice of taking accountability for your actions, your choices, and your personal growth, and also recognizing that you have an agency to shape your life. Um, when we go back to Hooks and her concept of a love ethic, Hooks emphasizes that taking responsibility for yourself it's not a tool that is intended to negate the impact of systemic oppression, but it is instead to emphasize the power of personal agency as well. Which has taken me a long time to be able to fully digest. And I think most people have a negative or incomplete definition of accountability, to be quite honest. I think most of us incorrectly assume that taking accountability is the same of admitting fault or admitting a flaw or admitting that something is wrong with us. Um, I think accountability instead, what we should really, I guess, push for people to be more aware of is that accountability means taking ownership of your circumstances and taking ownership of your circumstances by identifying how your actions contributed to them and how your actions will affect what's next. How are we going, guys? I know I've had a few questions roll through and I will get to you in just a second, but I'll get through this final slide first before we have a bit of a yarn and then go for a break. But the fourth pillar of that, and let me change the slides here. We go. The fourth pillar of this concept of self-love is self-assertion. And so self-assertion is the willingness to be your own advocate and to speak your mind. And I think hopefully by the end of like when we get through these 6-week like pre-learning or pre-course before the workshops, and when we actually start to evolve these community projects, all of us will feel comfortable enough to be able to speak our minds. And when I say speak our minds, I mean that we are confidently voicing our needs, our desires, our boundaries, and also that our voice without apology or hesitation. That we are unapologetically having that voice in a way that is done with tact and most importantly, done with love, right? And I think going back to the concept of a love ethic, Hooke acknowledges that this can be especially challenging for those who might be non-binary or gender diverse or women who've been socialized to believe that assertiveness or having a loud voice or taking a role of leadership is an undesirable quality. And I think this is something that a lot of us will probably grapple with over the course of the QYN leadership program in terms of how do we dismantle in our own minds and reframe the narrative that these leadership qualities are undesirable. I think those of us in the queer space have definitely experienced this in one way or another. I think it's one of the biggest challenges that we face, and particularly as a community that is constantly targeted, right? I think we're conditioned out of a place of survival or out of a place who's craving that love and acceptance and belonging to make ourselves more palatable. And I think what we've learned, particularly in the evolution of queer leadership, is that hasn't really been adaptive to what we need it to be. And so having that assertion to be able to dismantle what we've been conditioned to think are undesirable qualities, and be able to intertwine that into what we see as leadership qualities as well. And then finally, we have purposeful living. And this is the final kind of domain when we're talking about self-love. And that purposeful like living really means that it is the commitment to identify and pursue your values and your goals and your passions while continuously striving toward your own personal growth and self-actualization. So really having intention and determination and commitment to yourself and your own growing and belief. All right. Going to stop there for a second because it's now we're halfway into the session, and I'm wanting to give us a bit of a break as well to just allow ourselves to digest the information, to go get some food, get a drink, get a cup of tea, whatever it might be. But please, yeah, take your time. And I say we'll come back at 7, oh, in 10 minutes. Take a 10-minute break, guys. And I'll see you back online shortly. At this. It's a I'm sorry, it's a learning process, but I will get better at this. Okay, awesome. Cool. So we've talked about that self-love and how that is such an essential tool when it comes to really embodying and embedding a love ethic within our own leadership compass. Well, there you go. I dropped it again, the leadership compass, which we'll be cracking into next week. But really, it's your own framework and how you can embody and make your decisions and your direction come from a place of love as well. But I think what comes part and parcel with that is love for community as well. I think how we transition and how we mobilize that other ethic, that love ethic, when we're talking about social change and transformation, we're talking about that love for community as well. And Hook really goes on to say that, I guess, a lot of people kind of challenge her on these ideas, but what her frame or what her voice is that the primacy of romantic relationships has also really almost inhibited our ability to nurture broader communities. And the value of community in the Australian system, at least, or in Australia, has been overshadowed by a focus on the nuclear family with a romantic couple at its center. So this idea of love has kind of, we've been conditioned to think that this concept of love can only be used exclusively within very romanticized concepts and very romanticized ideas, which are the bedrock of society. And I think what we understand, particularly for those of us in the queer community, is that often is not the case. For most of us, that actually has been almost the opposite experience that we have had. And we always talk about a chosen family and finding that community and sense of belonging and safety and love from people that aren't blood. But then this concept of love seems to still be, or pure love, um, seems to be used in very exclusive terms. At least that's what we've been conditioned to think. And I think when the example that I used just before is as the nuclear family, right? And the nuclear family, which is really what I'm talking about essentially, is that picket fence, big, like beautiful house, like 2 kids, a mom, a dad, that kind of idyllic life that we've been conditioned to consume. The nuclear family has been presented as this ideal structure and to ensure both personal well-being, but more often the combination forces the capitalism and patriarchy to make the family unit a place of oppression rather than love. So we're looking at how like these systems of support kind of operate within those broader structures. We know that this idea or this bit we've been fed about the nuclear family is a product of those combined forces of capitalism and the patriarchy. And going back to what I was talking about just before about this concept of love being about force and domination, we're trying to kind of like reframe that as to say that love should be a place of trust and reciprocity as well. I think a reflection that I often have is that the thing is actually, and this is something that's quite like that I still wrestle with, is that the nuclear family hasn't always been the cultural norm, actually. And according to conservative political and cultural commentators, in the 19th century and early 20th century, extended households, which multiple generations and many children living together pretty much, that what's what we're talking about in these extended households, were very common, like super common. I think about so my mom is Australian, but her family is Scottish, and they talk about and grew up like in the sticks in Scotland, where there was like 18 people living in a house. And this was not uncommon, right? But I think, however, now, like with the rise of industrialization and urbanization and this cultural shift towards individualism rather than collectivism, that's kind of gradually led to the decline of the extended households and the emergence of this idea of a nuclear family as the dominant family structure in Australian society, especially since the mid 20th century, pretty much. So it's really interesting where this concept of love, how quickly that's evolved and grown. And when I say grown, maybe not necessarily for the better, but it's interesting how it's evolved. And I think also I think that's always just an interesting reflection to have for this concept. Like love is kind of embedded in this idea of a nuclear family, but even a nuclear family itself is quite a modern phenomenon as well. Um, and I think being in community with other people is part of like the reason that is so critical is because it allows you to expand your practice of love. When I think we've been conditioned, as I said, talking about like these external structures such as like the evolution of the industrialization and urbanization and globalization and all these stations, it actually what the product of it has been is actually made us all incredibly more isolated than we've ever been. And I think like being able to kind of translate that love into community kind of and sorry, when I say that we're the most isolated that we've ever been, it's not the product of a broken system, but it's actually the product of a system that is working exactly as it was designed to function. It's like it's a system that is designed to create this. It works for these tools of domination and these systems of domination. Hopefully you're still with me. I feel like I've gone a bit abstract, but it's hard not to kind of constantly see these like kind of puzzle pieces connecting together. Um and I think, yeah, it's basically the crux of what I'm coming down to is that being in community with other people is critical because it allows you to expand that practice of love in a world that kind of is really quite recalcitrant against it. And then I think when we go back to Hooks again, she defines community really as a group of people that have learned to communicate honesty and share a strong commitment to support and empathize with each other in joyful and difficult times, allowing them to build relationships and also to transcend this hardship and adversity. I'm hoping this is all really sounding familiar to all of us because I think every time I talk about this, the first example people think of is the queer community and how we've been able to cultivate a community which is outside the parameters of this concept of family and this nuclear concept of where that love we've been told is exclusive to, right? So it's interesting. I'm hoping you guys are able to kind of pull together these puzzle pieces from what we're learning about the love ethic and what we see in the queer community as well. I think also another reflection that I've had, particularly when we're talking about love for community, is that others have also made the case that the cultural importance placed on romantic relationships, and I think more specifically marriage, and I think in Australia, it was only very recent history that even marriage equality became a thing, but the concept of marriage has really weakened those social ties, and it's led to higher rates of rates of isolation as well. And I think one of my favorite books, which has really challenged a lot of my ideas when talking about love and how we use this as a tool of social change and transformation, it's a book called How to Fall in Love with Anyone. Um, and hopefully a lot of us, or at least some of us that are on the call today, are able to relate to that concept. But it argues that the Western ideology of relationships assumes that the work of caring for someone should primarily fall on one person. But without like without the preeminence of that kind of heterosexual relationships or marriage, care and support could be redistributed across networks of extended family, neighbors, and friends. But it really is talking about like how all these systems have what the product of it has been, ironically, is that it has created more social isolation. And so that love and community has been amiss. And there is an argument that suggests that perhaps the reason there have been so many roadblocks when we're talking about social transformation and change is because it's been done with an absence of love. You staying with me? We got it? I know it's a bit abstract and I do apologize for it, but I'm hoping the reason that we made this the first session was to kind of plant these ideas there in the first place. So, um, there are a couple of videos I want to share with you guys, and this is to kind of because I think you've done it, you've had enough of listening to me. It's kind of been just a bit of a what do we call it? Uh, rampage of me just talking to you and speaking at you. But what I would love to do is actually show you some videos about Bell Hooks herself and what she's talking about. And there's two videos I want to talk about. One is from Bell Hooks talking back in the 90s, which was really her prime. And then I want to show you a video which is a video of her and Laverne Cox. And for those of you who don't know, Laverne Cox is a phenomenal actress herself, but identifies as a trans woman. And so the two of them have this dialogue about where that love lies in community as well. And so I'd love to share those two with you. So let me get these videos up and we'll get cracking. All right, so this is the first one. Okay. Again, thank you so much, everyone, for your patience with all of this. Here we go. All right. Share. Here we go. All right. Let's go.
The best in all of us. And right now, enjoy great fresh specials on healthier lunchbox snacks, like Australian blueberries, 125 grams, now just $4 a punnet, and packed in your boot. That's today's fresh food, people.
The ad.
I learned about love from the seeds and magic Black women gifted me. My mother taught me the importance of familial love. My godmother, Tasha, and Grandma Betty demonstrated the importance of loving your community through their organizing work in Chicago. My mentor, Dr. Derek Williams, armed me with the love of literacy and the power of having language to describe all the ideas we encounter. He introduced me to bell hooks. In his Alabama accent, he would say, "NB, that's me. Man, you gotta get on his hooks, man. It changed my life. Hooks taught me how to truly understand Black masculinity and love. NB, Hooks, Ella Baker, and King are my go-tos on love." Bell Hooks changed my life through many writings, specifically an essay, Love as the Practice of Freedom. She refers to an ethic of love and how the discourse of love is missing from our contemporary conversations around liberation. Hooks references the Reverend Howard Thurman to demonstrate the necessity of love to nourish our souls and community. My introduction to Howard Thurman begins with her. Who was Howard Thurman? He was the dean of Marsh Chapel here at Boston University. He was a professor of religion. He was many other things, but he refused to be confined to labels and put in a box. Thurman published Disciplines of the Spirit in 1963. He offers 5 core disciplines that coach the human spirit: commitment, growth, suffering, prayer, and reconciliation. He offers a 3-step love ethic. First, a desire to love. We must love because we want to receive love. It's quite simple. Love is not something people have to earn. Second, exercise a disciplined use of the imagination. Using our imaginations, we can envision many of the circumstances. The goal is to consider all realities outside of our understanding. I like to refer to this as intentional empathy. Last, there must be a sense of leisure, though we must not love with the intention of achieving this leisure. If we have completely embraced the love ethic and love as a discipline, then we are able to love with all our being. We gain the ability to embed love within our social structures and systems. You simply cannot be an anti-racist without deep soul-level work situated in love. Thurman said it best: any structure of society, any arrangement under which human beings live that does not provide maximum opportunities for free-flowing circulation among one another works against social and individual health. Any attitudes, private or group, which prohibit people from coming into across-the-board contact with each other work against the implementation of a love ethic. This is a clear example of how essential a love ethic is for every living thing on our planet. Thurman distinguishes between love as luxury or necessity. If we leave all the work to Black women, love will remain a luxury. If we want love to become a necessity, we must all work to center a love ethic individually and in all our communities. Only then can we truly appreciate the magic all around us.
All right, let me.
Want to unleash brighter skin? Try it.
Sorry. I think that video probably did a much better job of me being able to articulate what is the role of a love ethic and how that can play out. I think the Emancipator, they have a series on YouTube, which is a part of like the material that you would have seen on the QYN program, the QYN Leadership Hub. And if you have the time and capacity, I really encourage you to have a look at that material. They are really awesome at being able to translate these quite abstract concepts that I have shared with you this evening into really exciting and quite tangible ideas about how we can live that through. There's one more video that I want to share, and then for the last 15 minutes of the session, we're going to do a bit of a Q&A session, because I can see there's a number of questions that have come through, and I will do my best to get through and answer them. But for the time being, at very least, I want to show you the second video, which I think for me was something that I really enjoyed and kind of sparked a lot more curiosity in myself as well. And that's a conversation that Bell Hooks and Laverne Fox have, which is discussing what is feminism. And take this with a pinch of salt. Obviously, we all have our own experience of feminism, and I think for me, at least, in the queer community, that we cannot achieve true social transformation without feminist theory. But the reason I chose to show this video as well is because it is a conversation with Laverne Cox, who typically has had quite, in some ways, challenged the ideas of Hooks to apply it in a modern context. But it's a really interesting dialogue that emerges from these two. So let me share this again. Here we go.
I think that the important piece around the high heels, I guess a little bit about the high heels, and you say you won't wear high heels. I think the piece is that for me anyway, is that we don't demonize the woman who is in high heels, and we don't demonize the woman who's out of high heels. I think there is a culture that particularly that I work in mainstream media, that wants to say that all women should be in heels and all that. I think that's ridiculous. I think it's really, how do we begin to celebrate all the ways in which we want to comport ourselves, and not say that one person is more feminist than the other, and so that we can again find ways to come together across difference.
It's difficult because some people are more feminist than others. The fact is,
why we love bell hooks.
I mean, this is something that's been on my mind lately, and it's been disturbing me, is that if feminism is all things to all people, then what is it? I mean, how do we locate it as a radical political movement in our lives if everybody just makes of it, which doesn't mean that we should demonize, but we do have to be clear about what are the boundaries. What is the line that you cross, that you can in fact say I'm a feminist? Like for me, my students will say, well, I'm anti-abortion, but I'm a feminist. And I'll say, but that is impossible, because you can be I would never choose to have an abortion because I don't support that for myself. But there is no one who's genuinely a feminist who doesn't support reproductive rights for women. And it's, again, I mean, it's so hard for us because we live in this binary world that's always saying choose one thing or the other. I don't try to get someone to choose my values about abortion, but I do feel that part of the essence of feminism is that women have control over women's bodies, that women have reproductive rights, all women. And so you can't want to take that away from somebody and then brag about how feminist you are.
Oh, very good. So as you can see, Bell Hooks has always been incredibly outspoken, and I think she goes. But the reason I wanted to show that short video is that she really embodies a lot of the things that we've discussed today, and one of those being self-assertion. And I think particularly for those of us who are emerging queer leaders like yourselves, or those who are still trying to evolve our own leadership framework from that love ethic. It's a constant learning journey, and it's not something any of us are going to master anytime soon. I would never consider myself a master in leadership or being able to embody a love ethic, but I think that is part of it. It's being able to surrender and relinquish yourself to that learning journey as well. All right. A lot of stuff that we've just tried to digest and consume. So thank you so much for your generosity of patience and your generosity of spirit, as well as we lean into these ideas. Hopefully this has kind of ignited for you some considerations and reflections that you have about what you want to embody and embed in your own leadership framework as well. As I said, I like the next kind of 15 minutes is a bit of a Q&A session, and there's a list of questions that people have put through, which is really exciting. And I'm glad that you guys have engaged with this as much as you have. And I think something that's I find really interesting is that the concept of leadership courage. So someone's like put in a question here, which is like, I've recently been learning about the concept of courage and how important it is to lean into when in all leadership positions, whether that be within a family unit, whether that be within a leadership position within work, whether it been in a community. How have you seen that you've applied courage, or how do you see that a love ethic and courage and leadership courage interact? And it's so brilliant that you guys kind of have brought this up. I think that, for me, it's a great reflection to see how you have been constantly reflecting on the issues that we've come up on this. And for me, I think leadership courage, I mean, I first came across this concept with Brene Brown, which is like daring to be brave. And when she talks about vulnerability and leadership as well. But I think the concept that comes out from this is this idea of leadership courage. And when I say that, I mean to have courage, like real courage. And I don't think courage, it's not about being the most fearless, nor is it about being the toughest. I think it's about acting despite that fear. It is that moral courage, not the courage that hides behind aggression or authority or title, or going back to what we've learned about a love ethic, about that kind of that as a tool of domination or fear. That's not what leadership courage is about. And I think probably I would go as far to say that if there are certain leaders that have enjoyed being perceived as aggressive, or like that socially withdrawn leader during the good times, there's often no real room to indulge in the concept of courage now, or this concept of leadership courage now, which is interesting. But I think the way that also comes out of that leadership courage is like the permission to give yourself to make imperfect decisions as well. And there's no time for the irrational quest for perfection that creates stalled momentum, really. Like, you have to understand that you need to make imperfect decisions, because perfect decision does not exist. And momentum and activity towards progress are more important than the inertia of perfecting the plan. And I think what I'm really getting into here is how like a love ethic interacts with that vulnerability in leadership as well. Yeah, I think courage is interesting. It's a current and I think love and courage are they interact with each other. I think you can't really have courage in leadership without completely embodying this concept of a love ethic as well. There's another question here which actually says, can you speak more about your own experiences as a young leader, whether that be setting up VOI or in how you've evolved to add these tools to your belt? Sorry, VOI has been a really interesting experience and learning journey when it comes to leadership. I think not only for myself, but everyone involved with us. I guess a bit of context in terms of how a VOI evolved. And for those who don't know, Voices of Influence Australia. So VOI actually started off with just me. And it emerged actually because it was when COVID had just happened. We were in lockdown. There are a number of challenges that people were facing. I just graduated my bachelor's from uni and had plans of moving to Edinburgh and going and doing my master's in Edinburgh and living my life, my Harry Potter dream. And I think had never considered that might not happen. For me, it was always it was a reality that was going to happen. And yeah, there were a number of situations that didn't happen, and sorry, why that didn't eventuate. And I remember sitting down with my dad and kind of having a conversation about like the challenges we were facing, about what direction do I go. And I really, now in hindsight, I think the two challenges that we were faced were why VOI actually emerged and was born. And that was the first one was that there were these structural, systemic, and social barriers in place, which were really disempowering young people from having a voice at the table. No one was taking a chance on young people. People find it hard to find work, but particularly in the social justice space, no one was taking any kind of young person seriously. And I think the second barrier to that was that there just weren't opportunities for young people to partake in decisions that directly impacted them. And so what was meant to start off as a blog evolved into VOI, and very quickly kind of evolved into what we are today, with with a focus of being kind of bifold. So the first is the promotion, protection, and attainment of human rights. And the second is being able to create these democratic spaces for young people to emerge as not only the leaders of tomorrow, but the leaders of today as well, and making sure that they are given a space and given a platform to have that self-assertion, and to be able to enact decisions which have huge consequences on us. I think also this kind of VOI emerged at a bit of a critical rupture point where young people felt that they weren't being represented. Whether we look at that in the queer space, whether we look in the climate space, it's not unusual that young people are the ones which are completely powering like these social change movements. And yet those voices are often silenced by decision makers and representatives that have very little experience or very little commitment, at least, to be able to enact those changes. And so VOI was born. And so that's nearly come up to 4 years, 3.5 years have been around. And it will always be one of my proudest achievements to have played a small part in what VOI has become. And I do mean it that I have played a minor part in what VOI has evolved and grown to. All of you will have the opportunity to meet the team that we are today. And look, I have no issue sharing with you, and I'm hoping it is of some comfort that our entire team, perhaps that's not the right stream. So I'd say like 90% of our team are all queer women, who I guess have found our pathway because as a product of like the world that we are kind of existing in. And so to link it back to the question, which was like, how did my experience as a leader at VOI, and I guess how I've kind of learned to properly embed the concept of love ethic within my own leadership style, is because of the people around me. Honestly, as I said, by no means do I see myself as a masterful leader. I'm constantly, in fact, it's the opposite. I'm a master of making mistakes. But the reason I'm a master of making mistakes is because I'm surrounded by phenomenal young leaders who give me that space and give me that permission and surround me with love and feed me with love and like unconditional love and support. And I hope that if they were here, they would say the same as well. And I think that it's a huge part of it. I think that goes back to like when you're investing love in yourself through like in leadership positions and into the community around you and into that extended community around you, there is significant room for social transformation. And I say that from our own experience, as a small team at VOI, we have the things that we've been able to achieve and accomplish have been significant. And I think a huge part of that is because of the love that we've been able to put into the work and the love that we've been able to put into each other as leaders. Honestly, if anyone were to kind of observe the meetings that we have, every meeting ends with this kind of outpour of appreciation and love. And it's not ever been engineered that way, nor has it ever been engineered that a VOI would be run by young queer women, but it is a product of the environment that we are in. And I hope that you guys get to evolve and see that as well. Probably have time for one more question. As you can see, I'm pretty long-winded and I have a lot to say. But for those questions I don't get to, you guys would have seen in the learning space that there is a discussion page. So I will collate the questions that I'm not able to get to now, and I'll have some written responses there that will hopefully be able to speak to a lot of the matters that you're raising. I guess a question here is, as a young queer woman, what do you see as some of the challenges being faced in terms of being able to dismantle the current barriers in place? And what are some of the challenges? These are very good questions, guys. And what are what do you foresee needing to change to be able to create and mobilize other queer leaders? Big question. Big question. And I guess, again, I don't ever hold myself as a masterful leader in this space, but I think what VOI at least prides itself in, and why we are so excited to have this program up and running now, is that we want to see ourselves as an incubator for young leaders. We want to invest in young leaders, because the whole ethos of our existence is that young people are not only the leaders of tomorrow, but they are the leaders today as well. And they're not only are they leaders of today, they're catalysts of change for today. It's why we are wanting to invest in people's leadership journeys now through this program, and particularly through our Future Leaders Incubator Fund, where we want to be able to provide at least some sort of seed funding to be able to inject some passion and excitement into these ideas as well. I hope that answers your question. I'm also mindful I've done a lot of talking, and that is quite late. I'm based over up in the Northern Territory now, but I recognize you guys are 30 minutes ahead of me and it's quite late for you guys. So I reckon we wrap up. I don't want to overwhelm or scare anyone with the amount that we've been able to unpack today, but thank you so much for your generosity of spirit in yourselves, in VOI, in the queer community. Thank you for taking a chance on yourself to participate in the program. Next week, we'll be talking about a leadership compass, which basically allows us to be able to identify what kind of leader that we are, what are our strengths, what are our areas that we want to grow and evolve into, who are the people that we're going to be working with, who are the people, what are the things that are amiss. And I think this is a tool that is always really helpful to understand how we work with others as well. And hopefully, particularly in the workshops that we have, we'll be able to, all of you will be equipped with the right tools to be able to work with a really diverse and exciting group of people. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining today. We'll see you next week, the same time, same day next week for the second session. As always, please do not hesitate to reach out and give us a buzz or email us, message us. There's a message function on that learning portal, which we all have access to. So please, if there's any questions you have, any design, like burning curiosities, please send me a message, send us all a message. But until then, wrapping you all in lots of love and a big hug. And I hope that you are gentle on yourselves this week as you start to step into this new journey that you've all taken a chance on yourselves for. And I can't wait to see how we all evolve and grow as a team. But until then, have a great rest of the week and a wonderful weekend. And we'll all see you next Wednesday. Yeah. Goodbye, everyone. Have a great evening.